Have you ever dreamt of having afternoon tea with a royal? Do you know how to hold your cup and what you shall eat first? Would you know what to do and what not to do if you ever met King Charles III? Have you discovered the secret message behind the late Queen moving her handbag from one arm to the other? Are you completely up to date on what to wear to a ball at Buckingham Palace or the King's summer garden party? Do you know which piece of cutlery to use and how to correctly use your napkin and where to place it once done?
It's all going really well until you have the scones, and then you've got the scone debate, and then you're probably thinking, well, what do? Do you put the cream on top? Do you put the jam on top? And the Queen, being one of the most diplomatic ladies ever, would make sure that both ways are done so that you couldn't really say that the Queen did it one way or the other, which I think was absolutely genius.
Grant Harold, former butler to King Charles III and Camilla Queen Consort, reveals the secrets of royal protocol and everyday life in the upstairs-downstairs world of royal etiquette, tradition and custom. Elegance, poise and perfect harmony, essential ingredients for an encounter with royalty. Should you receive a royal invitation, dine at a state banquet, or simply wish to serve the perfect scones, this Royal Butler's Guide will have you sipping gracefully at your teacup. You are warmly welcome to A Butler's Guide to Royal Etiquette.
My name is Grant Harold. I'm known as the Royal Butler because of my background being a Royal Butler to the King Charles III, the Queen Consort and Princes William and Harry.
Grant Harold started his life of royal service as butler to the young Prince of Wales, now King Charles III. His early tenure at Highgrove House was a baptism of fire, as the shy young man hid quietly in a room, nervously avoiding bumping into his new master for the first time. However, the young prince, who has an eagle eye for detail and an extremely highly tuned pair of ears, walked into the room in which young Grant Harold was hiding, and that was the first meeting with his new master following his appointment. Did you know that good manners and etiquette exist for one simple reason? To be considerate, respectful and caring to those we meet, not to inconvenience them, and to ensure they feel comfortable.
I wanted to become a Royal Butler because I watched a documentary back in 1992 about the Queen and her family, and I liked the idea of being part of this. And I said to my late father, how do you become part of that? How do you join the royal family? At which point he said, well, you either marry a member of the royal family or you will go and work for them. And I decided that the best option would be to marry one of them. So that's how this crazy kind of dream began.
Of course, being a royal butler requires poise, precision, and most importantly, discretion. Working in a royal residence is unlike any other butler's job. The British monarchy is an institution steeped in history and tradition. As such, certain protocols must be adhered to, as you may imagine. To follow etiquette is a mark of respect, and when dealing with dignitaries from foreign lands, it is simply essential for these rules to be followed on both sides.
I always get asked what a royal butler does, and it's quite difficult to explain because the role is so varied. And the easiest way to explain it is if you've ever seen any of these kind of historical dramas and you see the butlers doing their day-to-day activities, it's kind of like that. So it's looking after, obviously, the royal family, it's looking after guests, it's laying tables, serving meals. But there's also a modern aspect, which is being able to use computers, send emails, correspondence, phone calls. So it's the easiest way to describe a royal butler is it's almost like a personal assistant. Really, that's what you become. And if I can say, it's great fun. You're always pinching yourself because you can't believe you're doing working for such an amazing family.
Grant, the royal butler, knows only too well the importance of getting things just right. He is the quintessential English butler, an eye for detail which would be the envy of any spy. the tact and diplomacy which would be an example to any member of the diplomatic corps, and the discretion that can only ever be required by being a butler to a senior member of the British royal family.
The training side of becoming a royal butler was really interesting for me because I was already trained as a butler. I went into the industry when I was, I think, 21 years old, and I spent 2 years training in Scotland at a private house, Ben Alder Lodge, that was the name of the house. And then after that, I went to Oban Abbey, which is now the home of the Duke and Duchess of Bedford, but at that time it was the present Duke's parents who were living there, and I trained with their butler and then became the head butler. At that time, I believe, the youngest butler in a stately home in this country. And when I went to join the royal household, one of the things that was said was I would have to almost retrain, have to relearn the job as a royal butler. But the nice part was they knew that I was fully trained, so that I was able to kind of immediately take on good responsibility. They knew that I could do the part of a butler, but I just had to learn, basically, how to be a butler for members of the family that I was working for, because obviously, like everybody, you've got things that you like done a certain way.
Young Grant's ambition for a life in service started at a very young age, and his career has been punctuated by enormous tragedy and challenge for the royal family, as well as great joy in supporting the royals in pursuit of their duties. Grant Harold, now a social media sensation, is fondly known by the title Defender of Etiquette, and he takes great delight in maintaining standards of etiquette and good manners in all that he does.
I was lucky working at Highgrove because the hierarchy for me was, there wasn't a huge amount above me, which is quite nice really, because when you think of the royal household, there can be a lot of people involved. At Buckingham Palace, you've got obviously Lord Chamberlain, Master of the Household, you've got butlers, senior footmen, under butlers. There's a whole array of staff where with the King, it was quite simply his butler's department. And then there was, I suppose, originally there was a private secretary above who you were kind of responsible to. And I had another house manager that I used to report to. So there'd be a house manager, a butler, head butler, that I'd report to. And then there was one other above that, which would probably be one of the private secretaries.
Whether one is entertaining guests in the wilds of Scotland at Balmoral Castle or holding a state banquet at Buckingham Palace, the royal experience is all about meeting exacting standards. Have you ever wondered what the real meaning of the word etiquette is? It simply does not matter if we're referring to dining, walking, or even greeting. The word etiquette refers to the customary code of polite behaviour in society or among members of a certain group of people, and the British royal family will always uphold it. When meeting and greeting the great and the good, it is key to blend seamlessly. One must behave and dress impeccably.
Etiquette was originally founded in France by Louis XIV. He had it for his palace in Versailles. He wanted a rule book, if you like, and this stemmed from the gardens because people were walking on the grass, and his gardener asked if they could put signs up instructing people where to walk and where not to walk. And this is how it began, and then those rules carried on within the royal court and have obviously evolved, and our royal family picked up on these centuries ago, and they've continued, they've evolved, they've changed, but they're there. And it's everything from how a member of the royal family meets and greets somebody, to how they eat, how they drink, how they carry out some daily activities, right down to how people are supposed to act and behave around them as well. So it's really important, the etiquette part, and it's something that, again, the royal family pride themselves upon.
It is the job of a butler to do absolutely everything to look after their charge, to ensure that all of their clothing is in the right place at the right time, properly cleaned and laundered, and to ensure a smooth running of every aspect of the prince's life. Of course, there are other members of staff to liaise with press, to look after the infrastructure of the royals' lives, but the butler is perhaps privy to more of the royals' private lives than any member of staff. This trusted position is therefore given to only a few very, very carefully selected individuals. And this royal butler has been extremely careful never to divulge the secrets of any of the people for whom he has worked.
I've always been fascinated in etiquette certainly from my teenage years, if not before. I remember Christmas dinners when I was younger, when I was 8, 9, 10. My parents were very strict about laying the table, the course being served in the right order, using the right cutlery, using your napkin. All these, they're also very strict about when you met people that I behaved the right way, that I stood if somebody walked in the room. So they were quite strict about that, and that's one of my main things I do today is I teach royal etiquette and British etiquette to other royals, celebrities, VIPs, and it's something that I enjoy teaching. I get a lot of fun out of it. And also, there's a humorous side to it, there is a fun side to it, and I enjoy that part as well, because a lot of people find it funny that, you can practice walking with a book in your head to find the right way to walk. And that goes down to deportment, but I think they're fun and they're important. They are important life lessons.
One can only wonder what happens behind palace walls. What is it really like to work with royalty? Are they creatures of habit, or are their day-to-day lives a little more surprising than one might expect? A young butler walking into the palace gates for the first time, though thoroughly trained in his role, he could not have expected the world of etiquette and protocol he would walk into. Day to day and year to year, what is always the case for any royal is the following of a strict schedule.
I'd be willing to make a bet that King Charles III's daily routine hasn't really changed, because he's very traditional. Things were always kind of the same way. The things that were done was always done the same way, a bit like with the late Queen. And I think that those routines will continue. And what I mean by that is throughout the year, there's different places he goes, different things he does. We all know those things and places he goes. And a very good example I can give, as I mentioned, that obviously the Queen tradition would go to Sandringham for Christmas and stay there until the anniversary of her father's death in February. And I pointed out that the King likes to go up to Scotland in the new year, and I was convinced that tradition would continue, which is what he has continued to do. So his routine, the way he likes to do things, I think to an extent will continue. There will be some differences because he's now king, and there has to be changes, but I think the majority of it will continue the same as it always has.
The very way one meets and greets royalty is of the utmost importance. Even when working for them, there is a certain way to address them as one enters the room.
When meeting a member of the royal family, it's the same. Again, the line-up would be the King and Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales, followed by the King's siblings. And the way you address them, for all the other members of the royal family, it's quite simply Your Royal Highness, followed by Sir and Ma'am. And as I've mentioned, if you wish to offer a bow or a curtsy, then you can do that. With the King and Queen, very different. It's Your Majesty. Both are addressed as Your Majesty, followed by Sir and Ma'am. And once again, the bowing and curtsying is personal choice. The Buckingham Palace have always said that it's not enforced. It's something that you do if you wish to do. But I think it is nice to offer it because it shows that you respect the titles.
Part of the role of a royal butler means travelling to other royal residences. One should expect the unexpected. You never know whom you may run into.
From my point of view, the very first time I met the Queen, it was a little bit awkward because I didn't actually speak to her, quite simply because I was on a horse, and it was on the Balmoral estate. And I'd gone out to exercise her ponies. I was given the opportunity to do this, and I used to love horse riding when I was younger, so I jumped at the chance. And at the end of the ride, we were coming down a hill by the castle, and at which point my horse started acting a bit strange. We were coming down the hill towards the castle, and my pony started acting a bit strange and started kind of almost walking backwards. And I thought that I looked down and I could see something, and I said, "Oh, there's rats or there's rabbits or something at the down on the ground. And the lady who had taken us out, she was shaking her head. And I'm thinking, why is she shaking her head? And I looked again, and it wasn't rats or rabbits. It was, well, they were red. It was corgis. And I suddenly thought, oh, corgis, nice corgis. At which point I looked over, and there was the Queen with a headscarf on. And that was the very first time I came face to face with her. Absolutely amazing. I remember that as if it was yesterday. And one lesson I did learn, even though I was told you should bow all for ladies' curtsy if you see, remember they're all family, I learned very quickly, do not bow on a horse, because it just looks so bad. It looks ridiculous. And she had a bit of a giggle at that, and luckily, she kind of got the dogs and walked off. But it was amazing.
Though a butler's role is to serve, the royal calendar features a special event known as the Gillies Ball. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert began the great tradition in Balmoral Castle as an opportunity to thank their staff for a job well done. Every September, great excitement fills the air as the question of who may find themselves in the coveted position of dancing with the monarch.
I never let this dream go. So even despite everything else I did, I kept thinking one day I'll get to dance with her. And then I think I'd only been working for the family for maybe a year, maybe 2 years. And I noticed that they have the balls at the castle, the Gillies balls. And there's 2 a year. One, I think it's August and September. And I put my name down for one. And then I took dancing lessons. There was an opportunity to do some dancing lessons, so I signed up to do these. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell in the family I was doing this. I kind of kept it a secret. Off we go to the castle. And I remember as we were driving through the gates, there was people standing waving. And I remember as a kid standing there waving at the cars that when they used to drive in. And I automatically kind of put my hand up and did a wave. I think that was my moment of thinking, I've finally done it. I'm on this side now, kind of thing. Thankfully, everyone found it quite funny. We then drove on up to the castle. I got out the car. The Prince and the Duchess of Cornwall went into the castle. I walked round into the ballroom, and soon after getting in there, the national anthem began. Queen walked into the room with the other members of the royal family down a beautiful staircase. And the Duchess of Cornwall immediately came and found me. She said, this is a dance. So we had a dance. And during the dance, she said, you're very nervous. And I said, that's because I have a dream that one day I'll be in this room and I'll dance with the Queen, because I saw a documentary when I was 13 years old. And she said, Grant, there's 120, 30 people in that room, maybe more, 150. And she said, it's highly unlikely that you will have to dance with the Queen. No sooner than she'd said that, the music stopped, and she was staring beyond me, and I couldn't work out what she was. She wasn't saying anything, she was just looking. So I turned round, and behind me was the Queen, and I looked back at the Duchess, and I was like, help. And then the Queen said, right, will we have a dance? And I got into it was a reel with the Queen, the Prince of Wales, Duchess of Cornwall, the late Prince Philip, myself and one other. And we went into this extraordinary dance, and part of it you get to dance with the Queen, which was amazing. And no sooner, when it was over, that first dance, I couldn't believe it. And I remember phoning up my late mother and saying, that dream I had when I was a youngster, I've actually got to do it. I've just danced with the Queen. My mum said to me, that's lovely, darling, can I call you back? I'm just doing your father's supper. So I've just told her the most amazing thing that's happened, and it was more important to get the supper finished, done for my father. But for me, it was a dream come true, really special memory. And it's one of those, I was lucky enough to dance with her on other occasions, but it is one of those memories that I'll always treasure. And luckily, when the Queen passed, obviously that's the room where her body was put, and that's something that I found really difficult to deal with, because obviously it was something I admired, respected, and that was when that dream for me as a youngster began.
Should you be invited to dine with the royals, would you know what piece of cutlery to use first? Or when you can begin eating? You needn't fear. Grant's Guide to Wine and Dine with Royalty will teach you everything you need to know. If dining in royal spheres, it's most important that the table is laid with military precision, beginning with the way that you position the cutlery. Let the setting of the royal tables begin.
So when it comes to laying out a table for a member of the royal family, it's probably different from how most people lay out a table, because obviously you're just going to have the basics, the knife, the fork, the plate. Where when it comes to the royal family and the aristocracy, obviously it's slightly different, because they have a wonderful array of crockery, cutlery, glassware, china. So they're going to obviously have all these other things that they can use, or that the staff can use. So the way I was taught to lay up was for each course. So traditionally you've got 3 courses. You've got a starter, a main course, and the pudding course. Now, what's something that the royal family do that's quite different to Old English is that Old English, you've had the rule, you start on the outside and you work your way in. So you start with your starter, your main course, and you go into the pudding cutlery. However, with the royal family, you have your starter, your main course, and then your pudding cutlery goes up the top. And I have been asked on many occasions, why is this? I have no idea. Historically, I believe the reason the pudding cutlery is up there is because the Victorians had so many courses and so much cutlery, basically they ran out of room. So they had to put things up the top in order to get everything on the table. In the modern times, obviously it's very different, but it's something the royal family still like to do, and that is something that's quite unique, I think, to them. And some, not all, but some aristocratic homes will do the same, because traditionally speaking, it should always just be in a line. And of course, not forgetting your glassware goes above the knives on the right hand side, and the napkin, which is very important, will either be placed in front of you, nicely folded, or sometimes on a side plate to the left of the forks.
The young Grant Harold could barely believe his luck in the early years of his tenure. At a private function, the then Prince of Wales personally introduced him to Her late Majesty the Queen, an occasion which was hard to forget.
One of my favourite memories was the Queen's 80th birthday at Kew Palace, and I was lucky enough to be asked to be there, and I was on the Queen's service, which meant I was serving the Queen. And what was extraordinary was I remember going round serving one of the kind of dishes, and the then Prince of Wales said to me, or said to the Queen, I should say, "Mummy, this is Grant, one of the newest butlers," and she looked at me and she said hello. So I said, "Hello, Your Majesty." And I can't tell you how awkward it was when you're trying to serve something and trying to have a conversation at the same time, while getting over the fact that the Prince of Wales has just introduced you to his mother, the Queen, who is somebody that I'd always, obviously admired and respected. And suddenly here, I was actually getting officially introduced to her. It was only a few months earlier that I actually bumped into her on horseback, but there was no kind of introduction. It was all very quick. But this was a proper introduction, and it was again surreal. And we had a conversation, as you do, It's all very odd. And at the end of the conversation, the other thing that was really funny was I went back through to get the next thing for the meal, and as I was coming back, my phone went, and luckily it didn't go off in the actual dining room, and I answered it because it was my mother, and as you know, when your mum calls, you have to answer the phone. And as I picked up, I said, I need to call you back, I'm just in the middle of something. And she said to me, oh, if you get a chance, put on, I think she said BBC One, because the Queen is having her 80th birthday at Kew Palace, and if you turn it on now, you can actually see it. You can see them because they're all going to come out for the fireworks. And I said, that's lovely, Mum, but I said, if I don't get this pudding course finished, they will not be outside for the fireworks, so I'm actually here helping with the dinner. And my mum couldn't believe it, and she said, I better let you go then. It was one of those surreal moments, and a great memory, one of those memories that I treasure.
Although all royal occasions are planned to the minute, they do not all go according to plan. But perhaps those moments when the etiquette is not quite followed or accidents occur show the reason we take care to follow such traditions. To know the rules and procedures allow both parties to feel a sense of comfort, to know exactly what is expected.
I think one of the, when it came to the actual royal service of meals, they were so beautifully planned that nothing really went wrong. I mean, there'd be the odd time that maybe something had been cooked a little over, or maybe something was running a little bit late. But the only thing that really comes to mind when I thought, oh, this is a disaster, I remember one of the other butlers once carrying a sauce boat, and as they were walking to where the dinner party was going on, they dropped it, and it made such a loud noise. A silver sauce boat, I'm sure it probably damaged it. It made such a loud noise, and the sauce went everywhere. And to me, that was an absolute disaster. One, that happened in front of members of the royal family and the guests. But secondly, I felt for this butler, because he would have to go back into the kitchens and tell the chef that the sauce is now all over the floor. Which, any chefs out there, you'll know how horrified you'd be at this news.
Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, was most amused at one such incident.
I think when something went wrong with a meal or if there was an event or something, they would find it amusing. I remember hearing a story at Buckingham Palace. There was I believe it was a dinner quite a few years back now. I believe it was one of the footmen's mobile phones went off, and it was God Save the Queen, which I do believe, because at one point I had God Save the Queen on my phone when I worked for the royal household, and this phone went off, and apparently the guests around the table all stood, and the Queen thought this was very amusing that the guests were standing because God Save the Queen played, which I totally believe, and I loved that story.
The young butler stared very carefully at the sparkling clean wine glass and placed it precisely where it should be. He stood back from the table and cast his expert eye over the place settings. He had come such a long way in the years since he joined the royal household, and this would be his first ever state banquet. It's all hands on deck when an important leader comes to town, and there's nobody quite like the British for putting on a formal but warm welcome. It takes over a year to plan a royal state banquet. It is no small feat. The master of the household takes on the important responsibility. Whether at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle or elsewhere, it takes 3 full days to set up the banqueting hall. When standards are so high, it's no surprise it takes so long.
State banquets are very different to... The planning's very different to a traditional royal meal, if you like, and that's because they're planned months in advance. In fact, when the invitation is issued to the other country, there's two a year traditionally, and the planning goes on months before, but the actual layup and everything on the actual table takes place a few days before. And there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, you've got the George IV Grand Service, which gets put out for decoration. It's also you'll see the gilt cutlery and the chargers, the glassware. They've got over 2,000 pieces of cutlery. You've got the crockery, the glassware. So there's a huge amount of work that goes into it, and all that's got to be cleaned and polished. The napkins have got to be folded. We're talking about 150 for these events. So even though if you look at a layup of a state banquet, it's very similar to how a table would be laid up for a member of the royal family. The difference is it is the finest. You know, they're putting on a show for the foreign. They're putting on a show for the foreign visiting head of state. So it's important that they have it's like we all do in our homes. When someone comes round, you put your best cutlery and crockery and glassware out. Well, I do. Maybe you don't.
Every champagne flute will be polished by hand. Each table setting, plate, cutlery and chair is dutifully measured in its distance from its neighbour and the edge of the table. Each place setting must be 18 inches apart. It simply cannot be even a millimetre out of place. A state banquet is an event that defines the certain pomp and essence that makes Britain great. Every tiny detail must be perfect. The afternoon before the grand affair, the late Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles will inspect every last detail. No errors can be missed. If you are ever invited to such a banquet, you must carefully consider what to wear, when to arrive, and when to bow or curtsy. This was common practice for the late Queen Elizabeth. She would begin the meal talking to the guest of honour who would be on her right, and later talk to the guest on her left.
If you're invited to a state banquet, there's a couple of rules you have to remember and you've got to follow. Timings are important, so always arrive in the time that's stated. Don't arrive half an hour early because you will not be allowed in, and do not arrive late because if you're really late, again, you won't be allowed in. Dress codes are important. Traditionally, it will be a white tie, and for ladies, it will be ball gowns or formal wear with tiaras, medals, national dress. So it's very, very formal. As far as the actual rules with the actual state banquet, again, it's when meeting a member of the royal family, you've got to remember your bowing, your curtsying. Handshakes is probably unlikely unless you are the foreign head of state that's with a member of the royal family. And you've got to remember things like when the meal begins, there's the speeches, there's obviously the national anthems, there's then the orchestra will play the music as the meal's getting served.
Mr. President, I am delighted to welcome you to Buckingham Palace on this, the first state visit to Britain by a President of South Africa. By coming here, you give Prince Philip and me a chance to repay the magnificent hospitality you gave us on our own visit to South Africa.
As far as the actual meal goes, you've just got to remember to start on the outside and work your way in. With cutlery, glassware, you're going to start with the toasts. So there'll be the champagne, there'll be white wine, there'll be red wine, there'll be water, there'll be dessert wine, and there'll be ports. So you've got to remember your order of having those. Same with the courses, make sure you go in the right order, and always remember to use your napkin, and remember your napkin etiquette, which for ladies is where you have the crease away from you with the opening towards. Gentlemen have it the other way around. And the reason being is that ladies can pick up a corner, they can dab and then place the napkin back down, and it conceals any lipstick or crumbs. At a state banquet, you'll notice that the guest of honour, traditionally, this is obviously going to the Queen, will sit on the right of the Queen, now with the King, on the right of the King, as that's the most senior place for the guest of honour. And then there's kind of chain reaction around the table. If they've got a partner, they'll be sitting on the opposite side of the now Queen Consort. And then obviously you've got the hierarchy of members of the royal family and the foreign heads guests that are with them. So it's very much done in a certain order. Conversation etiquette, you'll see the King speaking to the guest on his right for the start and the main course, and then for the pudding, the fruit, the coffee, they'll turn and speak to the guest on the left. This is something that's done quite often with royal dining and in aristocratic homes. It's a great way of making sure that somebody's got somebody to speak to. You've also got to remember that if the King stands, then all the guests stand. The king sits, then all the guests can sit. And as far as the actual enjoying the meal, you should wait until the king begins eating, traditionally. And also, when the king finishes, stops eating, the guests should actually they should actually have finished, strictly speaking. The late Prince Philip used to say to other guests about the Queen that once the Queen stops, you've got to make sure that you're finished. So he used to tell everyone to quickly eat up so that they weren't left behind in a jokey, humorous kind of way. But it was quite a serious thing because the plates would get taken away once the Queen stopped eating, and that is a tradition that a king, I believe, will continue.
Preparation of the food happens as close to the event as possible. It must be of the highest quality and as fresh as possible. Certain foods are more preferable than others, but some must be avoided at all costs.
As far as dishes, royal dishes go as to what the royals enjoy having, the king always kind of goes for traditional meals, if you like, but something he is known to enjoy and support, interestingly, is mutton. He even used to have mutton lunches that are well documented. So he's very much somebody that likes traditional food. The Queen famously used to enjoy her fish. If she had meat, it had to be really well done. In fact, that was well documented. And obviously with there is always pudding courses, but I wouldn't have ever said they had sweet tooths. But they've got healthy appetites, good diets. The one thing that I was always made aware, and it's been again discussed, is that they've got to be a bit careful with shellfish, because if they have shellfish that is off, obviously the poisoning can be quite severe. And what you don't want is a member of the royal family who's suddenly out of action because of shellfish poisoning. And I've actually been with members of the family where this has actually happened, and suddenly they've got to make sure that that they're okay, because you don't want, as a member of the royal family, getting poisoned. So shellfish is something that they will avoid for that simple reason, because they really haven't got time to be ill.
Afternoon tea, not merely a meal but an experience, one to be enjoyed at a leisurely pace.
With a royal afternoon tea, the interesting thing about afternoon teas, from my point of view, is it was started by Duchess Anna Maria, the 7th Duchess of Bedford, and that's interesting for me because I worked for the Bedford family. So afternoon tea is a tradition that they still enjoy and participate in. So I learnt all about it when working for the Bedfords. When you go to work for the royals, they love the afternoon tea as well. In fact, the King's great-great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, was a friend of the 7th Duchess of Bedford, and this is how the tea taking began in the palace, because the Queen thought this was a fantastic idea. And of course the rest of the aristocracy copied this, and the afternoon tea is still an important part of any royal day. If you went and had tea with the Queen, there's obviously some things you would have to remember, and these have been debated over the years, but you'll notice that when the Queen would have a tea, she would always put the milk in after, and a lot of people say, well, why is that? And there's a historical reason. Basically, a few centuries back, Josiah of Spode invented fine bone china, which has got some animal bone, which meant that it could sustain the hot tea without cracking, where prior to that, clay mugs and the likes, they could quite easily crack, so you need to put the milk in first. But the new fine bone china, you could put the milk in after, which was extraordinary. So the aristocracy made a big thing about this, and that's a tradition that's carried on to this very day, that you still put your milk in after your tea. Again, with the Queen, you could have sugar. It's been documented recently that the King likes to have honey, so you can put some honey in your tea, which I think is a fantastic idea. I do it myself. It's a natural way of sweetening your tea, especially with Earl Grey. Again, if you go to the palace, you could be offered an Indian or a China tea, so like an Assam or an Earl Grey. You'd have hot water, sliced lemon. You could be offered that as well, and then it's all going really well until you have the scones, and then you've got the scone debate. And then you're probably thinking, well, what do you do? Do you put the cream on top? Do you put the jam on top? The cream on top, of course, is Cornish. The Devon is where they put the jam on top. And the way that I witnessed when I used to go to garden parties and similar things like that, the way it used to be dealt with, there would be a mixture. So sometimes you'd have the jam on top, sometimes you'd have the cream on top. And the Queen, being one of the most diplomatic ladies ever, would make sure that both ways are done so that you couldn't really say that the Queen did it one way or the other, which I think was absolutely genius. And I should also mention that a lot of people say, we'll never get the chance to go and have a tea or a coffee with the King, but there is 3 garden parties a year at Buckingham Palace. You never know, you might get invited, and when you go along there's about 10,000 people get invited there, and they drink, I think it's about 27,000 cups of tea, 20,000 sandwiches get eaten, 20,000 pieces of cake, and it's an amazing experience. But I always say, if you do get invited, make sure you put your milk in after your tea. Don't worry about the scone etiquette, because the scones will already be done, so you're not going to get that wrong. And make sure you use your napkin. And if you're having a conversation with a member of the royal family, the safest thing to talk about is the weather or the corgis.
Such is the level of discretion of royal staff that to this day, it's not known exactly what the Queen did when she was on her own. However, our insider, a senior member of the royal staff, tells us that Her Majesty was not averse to giving a cream and jam treat to her beloved corgis. Should you ever wish to host an afternoon tea suitable for royalty, take special care to remember the small details.
With an afternoon tea, traditionally, it should always be finger sandwiches, which are cut into those rectangles with crusts off. Do not panic, the crusts go to the chickens. Ensure that you're offering traditional things, smoked salmon, cream cheese, cucumbers, a nice one to offer, egg mayonnaise, ham and mustard, the traditional things. You then move on to the scones. Always make sure you have the clotted cream and the jam on offer, so people can do it the way they want. If you want to prepare them, as I mentioned, you do it the way the late Queen and now the King will probably do it, where it's half and half. And if you're offering cakes, there's many ways you can do this. You could put a few different pastries out. You could offer possibly a few different cakes, or go traditional and have a Victoria sponge. So the order that you should be enjoying your afternoon tea in with a royal is you've got your sandwiches, you've got your scones, and then you'll move on to lastly to the cakes, while remembering to drink your tea, because some people are so focused on where they're putting the cup. Have they got their plate? Have they got a napkin? Have they had a sandwich? Do they have 2 sandwiches? Do they do the scone? Is the scone already done? If it is, which one should they go for? If they have a cake, do they have a small piece, or do they do a big piece? Can you go back for another piece? Which I would say you don't, unless the royal offers you another piece. And then, as I said, don't forget to enjoy and drink your tea. But remember, you sip, you don't slurp, because you're not a food blender. And at the same time, if you wish to stir the tea so that you don't make too much noise in the presence of royalty, you do not swish it around like this. You always do a very gentle back and forward motion with no sound at all, because if you swish it around, it's going to make lots of noise, and I like to say that you are creating a storm in a teacup.
For the royal family, Christmas has always been a special time of year. For many of us, the festive holidays are a time of great tradition, and it is no different for the British royal family. The most important tradition features on our television sets on Christmas Day. The late Queen's traditional Christmas message broadcast around the nation at 3 p.m. Indeed, to truly experience Christmas like royalty, tuning in to watch the King's Christmas message is essential. All the royals settle down to watch it every year. Many of our nation's traditions were begun by the King's great-great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria and her beloved husband Prince Albert.
Royal Christmases are really quite special. The traditions of the Royal Christmas go back to Queen Victoria. So the Christmases that we all have, it is thanks to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, who are great-grandparents of King. So Prince Albert, being from Germany, brought the tradition of having the Christmas tree inside the house. Christmas carols all began during Queen Victoria's reign. Crackers became a thing in the reign. So a lot of what makes our Christmas is thanks to the Victorian era. obviously Christmas goes way back, but the kind of modern traditions that we do are not that old. And to this very day, the royal family still carry out the same traditions that Queen Victoria did. And what I mean by that, for example, is that on Christmas Eve, the royals will have their presents. So they'll have an afternoon tea and they'll open presents. I will quickly point out that obviously Father Christmas still comes on Christmas Day, so the royal children get their presents on Christmas Day, like all the other kids around the world. But as I said, the adults will exchange gifts. Now, it's been said it's funny gifts, and what that is, it's jokey gifts. I think Princess Diana famously once said that she gave some very special gift to a member of the royal family and then got something jokey in return. And that's when she discovered that that's how this works, is that it's time to give fun gifts. I think members of the royal family do give each other serious gifts, but I think that is on the actual Christmas day, where, as I said, the day before, they keep this tradition of the kind of fun gifts during an afternoon tea. The other thing about Christmas at Sandringham is, traditionally, it has always been at Sandringham. Well, certainly for the last 20, 30 years. Prior to that, it was Windsor Castle. And then the Queen recently did have another Christmas at Windsor Castle, but the King has moved it obviously back to Sandringham, which is a very traditional thing, because you've also got the seeing the royal family walk to church, and these are traditions that our late Queen was very keen to carry on, and the King carries them on as well. I think the one thing about the royal family is they like their traditions, they like the protocol, and they like the etiquette, and each generation very much keeps that, tweaks it, changes it, modernises it, but the core of it very much continues.
The late Queen would give all members of staff in the royal household a Christmas pudding following the royal feast of Christmas lunch. An outing to church and an expedition on the shooting grounds concludes the royals' traditional family Christmas. Elegance, poise, and perfect harmony. A royal butler's guide to a flawless encounter with royalty. Whether you receive a royal invitation, dine at a state banquet, or simply wish to serve the perfect scones, consider yourself prepared.